The Triumph of Death is a painting by Pieter Bruegel the Elder. It was painted around 1562, when the people of the Middle Ages trembled at the mere mention of the word plague. Scorched and barren land, where an army of skeletons sows horror and chaos, torturing peasants in every possible way, and Death on his horse furiously harvests the poor souls of the infected with his huge scythe. That had been going on for centuries until the outstanding Ukrainian academic and epidemiologist Danylo Zabolotnyi managed to quell the Black Plague in the 20th century together with all its relatives: cholera, typhoid, malaria. The Holosivsky district of Kiev is famous and popular because of its unique centuries-old park. There is a street between the urban skyscrapers that bears the name of the outstanding Ukrainian academic Danylo Zabolotnyi. And these buildings house the Institute of Microbiology and Virology of the National Academy of Sciences. It is essentially the scientist's brainchild. With his initiative, this unique research center was established in 1928. Here's how the life of the eminent scientist began. Danylo Zabolotnyi was born in 1866 in the village of Chobotarka, which is now Zabolotnya village in Kryzhopolsky district, Vinnytsia region. Father Kirill Pavlovich Zabolotnyi served under the local landowner. He often accompanied him abroad, which is how he managed to learn several languages on his own. Danylo inherited that ability to learn things on the fly. His mother, Yevgenia Mironivna, was the educated daughter of a local official. She taught her son literacy and instilled a love for books in him. You must have heard of the monument to the Duke in Odessa. If not, it is a bronze monument in memory of the Mayor Armand Emmanuel de Plessis, Duc de Richelieu. It's a popular spot with tourists. In the 19th century, a local classical gymnasium bore the name of the official. Danylo Zabolotnyi graduated from it. On to Odessa University next. The young man started making his own living. He gave private lessons to children from rich families and worked at a bacteriological station. It's also possible that the monument to the Duke became the silent witness of the matters of heart of the young microbiologist. Fate bestowed the scientist with a strong love for a young Odessa woman, Ludmila Radetska. She became his faithful friend and supported him over the years that God gave her. The infatuated young man dedicated poems to his muse. The door opened. She tiptoed in. Her tender eyes made everything seem bright. Love and life will forever remain a mystery, like a spark of a star on a cloudy night. Kyiv National Taras Shevchenko University. This world-famous educational institution is the cradle of many scientific geniuses. At the end of the 19th century, Zabolotnyi dreamed of enrolling in the medical faculty of Kyiv's then St. Volodymyr's Imperial University. The medical faculty was considered the center for studying bacteriology and epidemiology in the then Russian Empire. The microbiologist with experience of Odessa was accepted without question. His work at the faculty was aimed at finding a cure for incurable cholera. Death and his scythe fly through the sky and hacks down hundreds of frightened people. This is how the artists of the French magazine Le Petit Journal depicted cholera in the early 20th century. At the time, the epidemic claimed more lives than the outbreak of any other disease. Danylo Zabolotnyi was interested in the fact that some people remained unaffected during the epidemic. The scientist made a guess that such people are the carriers of the disease. He decided to undertake a crazy experiment to save humanity. Thus, he became a carrier of cholera. A few weeks later, he took a solution with a live pathogen. The same substance was injected into lab animals. The rabbits died a few hours later, while Zabolotnyi remained alive and well. Thus, the world's first vaccine against deadly cholera was invented. Those who were vaccinated did not fall ill during the epidemic. With mass vaccination, cholera disappeared entirely. Thanks to this medicine, modern society is no longer frightened by the threat of a large-scale cholera epidemic. During his visit to Kiev, outstanding biologist Ilya Mechnikov admired this selfless act. In memory of the visit, the Russian scientist gave his Ukrainian colleague a signed photo. To the fearless student from a surprise teacher, with best wishes in the fight against microscopic enemies. India, an exotic country of ancient religions, and not only, this land has suffered millions of deaths from endless epidemics. At the end of the 19th century, a pandemic of the plague broke out in India. Its tentacles reached out to all corners of the globe. Vaccinations against this disease had already been practiced in Europe. In India, however, they began much later. Annual mortality was about 550,000 people. World powers formed medical units to fight the disease. The Russian Empire joined the effort. Danylo Zabolotnyi joined the ranks of these brave men. The platform of the old Kiev railway station was so crowded that it was almost impossible to get to a train. The entire landing stage was occupied by doctors, medical workers, university professors, students, workers, and all kinds of people. The departing train car, occupied with expedition members, was littered with flowers. Fiery speeches and warm words were directed at expedition members, as well as requests to be careful and return from Bombay alive and well, triumphantly, could be heard from everywhere. The tram started, a friendly hurrah sounded across the train station, and a military band started playing a victorious march. The expedition arrived in Bombay on a steamboat. The Austrian, German, Egyptian, Italian, and French committees had already been hard at work there, but it was the Ukrainian scientists who managed to establish a number of facts that helped prevent a planet-wide catastrophe. Zabolotnyi's close friend, Vasyl Omelyansky, wrote the following. Barely knowing any English, he started studying it diligently. He also needed to set up a laboratory in a short space of time, get all the necessary supplies, and create an action plan on the spot. In short, he was in over his head, and he was rarely seen at his laboratory, but he had already grabbed everyone's attention as a talented and promising worker. Finally, the situation in India is resolved. Time to go home and make sure to pay a visit to Chobotarka. His beloved Ludmila and talkative fellow villagers were already waiting for him. However, love for science took over the microbiologist's emotions. This time, the Arabian Peninsula was in the grasp of the bony hands of the Black Plague. On my way back to Russia, I've been sent to Hejaz by the highest order to study the plague and life of Muslim pilgrims. Zabolotnyi examined the ancient burial sites of locals, and it was he who found the source of the plague. However, he risked his own life to make the discovery. The Islamic religion forbade opening up the bodies of the deceased. The offender could have been stoned to death for such an act. At night, in the moonlight, Danylo Kirillovich was secretly conducting research in the barracks. Suddenly, he heard voices of the locals nearby. To avoid being caught by the Arabs, the doctor hid the syringe in his pocket, accidentally pricking himself with the infected needle. Only taking the anti-plague serum in time and believing in victory over the Black Plague saved the scientist's life. It was the autopsies in Arabia that helped the scientists distinguish pulmonary and bubonic plague. It's important since treatment of these infections is different. As soon as Danylo Kirillovich returned to his homeland, another epidemic of the plague broke out in Mongolia. It was as if it was following its enemy. A new expedition was formed with Zabolotnyi at the helm. In the east, Danylo Kirillovich realized that medicine alone wouldn't be enough to completely eradicate the disease. It could only be gotten rid of by burning corpses. Microorganisms die in the flames, but keep living in the earth. In 50 to 100 years' time, they are brought back to the surface by animals. In all likelihood, various breeds of rodents represent in nature that environment in which plague bacteria persist in nature, so it's clear how important it is to find out the general diseases of rodents found in this area. However, the religion of the Mongols forbade burning corpses. It was said that the family that did that would be cursed by the gods, so people hid the bodies of their late relatives in their cellars, and the infection kept spreading. Over time, Zabolotnyi managed to convince the locals that only fire could save them from extinction. And here is Danylo Zabolotnyi back in the revolutionary Petrograd. The capital of the Russian Empire ended up in the hands of the Bolsheviks. It was a different time with different authorities. Instead of the city Duma and town governors, there were the councils of workers and peasants' deputies, the union of communes of the northern region. At the time, this was a frontline city that lacked supplies of food and had horrible sanitation issues. And since cholera had already been raging in other provinces, the city of revolutions and coups was also expecting it. In the period from June the 1st to June the 18th, 1918 alone, almost 5,500 patients were admitted to hospitals, 30% of whom did not survive. Up to 700 people got sick in a day. Danylo Kirillovich spoke at a meeting of the Petrograd Council of Workers, Soldiers and Peasants Deputies. He offered a program of urgent measures. Participants of the program nicknamed the doctor the cholera dictator. At the epidemiological department of the Institute of Experimental Medicine, the scientists created a vaccine committee and a bureau of vaccination units. Only decisive actions, knowledge and experience of the Ukrainian microbiologist managed to save the city. Mass preventive vaccination was particularly difficult. The main obstacle was the lack of laboratory glassware and nutrient environments for preparing the vaccine. I had to search for and requisition agar from pastry shops, use bottles of cologne as glassware, come up with appliances for heating, use bottles instead of ampoules, and test tubes, but still managed to prepare the necessary amount of the vaccine. Chobotarka, a place that feels good to visit any time of the year. In November 1918, Zabolotnyi returned to his parents' home. It was this center of the universe. Back in Odessa, he offered his young wife Ludmila Radetska to go on a trip to Chobotarka instead of Paris or Greece. His colleague from Petersburg, Dr. Pieter Krasavitsky, recalled the following. The wife of Danylo Kirillovich was indeed a spectacular, tall lady. I can still remember her wearing a fancy black suit and a big black hat in the streets, like it was yesterday. However, Ludmila did not greet her beloved with a tender smile in his home village. Though the scientist saved millions of lives, he was unable to cure his love from a chronic critical illness. Tuberculosis claimed her on the way from Petersburg to Chobotarka. The passing of his wife exhausted him. He had to stay in his homeland for several years. To suppress the heartache, he wrote, enlightened, and healed. Back again to the city of youth, love for Ludmila, and his first scientific achievements, Danylo Zabolotnyi was invited to Odessa. Here, he opened the first epidemiology department in the world. He studied typhoid. Over time, he founded the only microbiology department on the planet. Danylo Kyrillovich worked tirelessly. He studied syphilis, faced the ground zero of marsh fever and malaria. He dreamt of creating the perfect polymicrobial vaccine. It seemed as if years had no power over the old plague destroyer. He was constantly in a hurry and managed to do many things at once. Zabolotnyi's lectures were never academic. He was one of the first professors to refuse the dry and systematic presentation of the curriculum. He addressed his students in his poems. Enjoy your youth and fun. Wisdom will come with age, away with sadness and procrastination, to life in friendly ranks. He taught students to wash labware, vaccinate, prepare vaccines, and try to wake up inquiring, searching thoughts in everyone, keep it from falling asleep and calming down. One of his students, the future cardiologist Mykola Strazesko, recalled the following. Danylo Kyrillovich Zabolotnyi was always dressed modestly, spoke quietly but clearly, and when he saw how exhausted his students were at practical classes in the evening, he surprised them with a joke or a funny story from his childhood. His students were never bored in his lectures. He still kept in touch with his home village and often went there at least for a week at a time. He vaccinated, gave lectures in schools, and even found time to go fishing with the kids. His own son died at a young age, so the scientist gave all his fatherly love to orphans. He brought up and gave an education to 13 children. He was a welcome guest in every household. He discussed power with old men, and young people entrusted him with details on their relationships. Quite knowledgeable in art, Danylo Kyrillovich was into theater and literature, spoke Latin, German, French, and English. Academic Vasil Omeliansky wrote, I learned to love Zabolotnyi, to love him completely, the way he was, with all his pros and weaknesses, to love him for his big and noble heart, for his unusually sensitive, selfless, and tender soul. He was a man of impulse and emotion, not cold calculation. A great enthusiast, devoted entirely to serving a cause. He never had enough money. On the day before payday, he was sat there deep in thought over a long list. In the list, there was a number opposite each name, which was how much money he was going to send that person. Then he tallied it all up, and the result was always much bigger than his whole salary. Then Danylo Kyrillovich adjusted his glasses and patiently started the calculations again. Despite the tremendous workload, he was suffering from loneliness. Correspondence with the actress of the Moscow theater Natalia Duz brought consolation. This pure relationship of soulmates kept the scientist going until his last days. Never rely on the whims of fate. Always coordinate your life with your inner world. Otherwise, there will be oppression, emotional discord, and extinction. I say this straight from the bottom of my heart, as if to a young friend whose life is still ahead, and this life can blossom like a big lush flower. While the Bolshevik leader Vladimir Ulyanov Lenin was preparing for the complete occupation of Ukraine, Kiev was trying to create its own state, independent of Russia. In the spring of 1918, at the All-Ukrainian Congress of Grain Farmers, military and political leader Pavlo Skoropadsky was proclaimed the hetman of Ukraine. The new government opened schools and popularized its native language and history. The hetmanate established the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. Danylo Zabolotnyi was elected its president in 1928. He created the structure of the academy. He organized new research institutes and opened their branches in the regions. He did a great deal to improve the living conditions of scientists. Despite that, he did not worry about his own well-being. This is what his colleagues recalled about him. Here's how we found him. He was in a large cold hall where the Presidium of the Academy of Sciences had been located, on Volodymyrska Street. The sick president of the All-Ukrainian Academy of Sciences was lying on an iron soldier's bed in the corner. His clothes were hanging on the only chair which stood by the bed. One can imagine his living conditions if there was no proper apartment for the president of the All-Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. So he was forced to stay at these ordinary but unsuitable living quarters while the Microbiology Institute was under construction. An apartment there would eventually be provided for him. Hard work, active scientific work, and worrying over the Academy of Sciences were all exhausting. The scientist was often sick in Kiev. His body kept catching all sorts of infections, but he was inspired by his scientific dedication, sincere and noble heart, and an unusually sensitive soul. In 1929, Danylo Zabolotnyi went on a short trip to Leningrad. There was an incredible amount of work. The weather was awful. The wind howled along the deserted streets. Zabolotnyi fell ill with pneumonia. After a 2-day-long train ride from Leningrad to Kiev that felt like eternity, he lost weight, his face was pale, and eyes were burning with fever. His breathing became fast and hoarse. The scientist was very sick. Stockholm, Paris, and Berlin asked about his health every day, and it was getting worse by the hour. Pneumonia, endocarditis, spondylitis, and polyarthritis. His days were numbered. It was for the last time that Danylo Zabolotnyi looked with fading blue eyes at his favorite painting of cranes flying away and at the lush bouquet of flowers on the nightstand near his bed. His breathing got very weak, barely discernible, and then it stopped. Letters that would remain forever unread were piled on the nightstand. One of them was from France. The Pasteur Institute was inviting Danylo Zabolotnyi to Paris for yet another scientific session. He passed away, but he had left a legacy for future generations. My children love science and truth. Danylo Zabolotnyi.